Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're in the world. A very warm welcome to Meet Menaca, episode 87, Overcoming Grief with Yvonne Gordon. The best quote I came across was, no rule book, no time frame, no judgment. Grief is as individual as a fingerprint. Do what is right for your soul. And I'm sure the speaker will agree with me that grief is a very personal process. And I think everyone, how they go through is very unique for each person. Meet Menaka is a 90-minute talk show to create positive change across the globe. We share valuable information from experts in the field, inspirational real life stories, and wisdom from impactful leaders who challenge the social stigmas and norms to celebrate each and every one of you. Please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Meet Menaka, and help us share these messages to people who can benefit from it. Now, going back to the speaker, Yvonne is a life and empowerment coach, advanced grief recovery specialist, and mindfulness practitioner. Yvonne aims to empower clients by providing them with a toolkit of teaching to confidently face difficult challenges and overcome emotional barriers and limiting beliefs. Grief recovery is part of a toolkit of support mechanisms. The goal is to help people consciously recreate their life after loss. A very warm welcome to you, Yvonne.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we all have experienced grief, or most of us have experienced or known someone who have experienced grief in the past or present. And it is something none of us will be able to avoid long term for sure. As the saying goes, prevention is better than cure. But most of us don't talk about death and grief, loss in general, because it is perceived a painful process. But I think sometimes going through a painful process perhaps is the way to heal. I am not an expert in grief at all. Hence, we have invited the expert Yvonne to come and speak about this. Thank you so much, Yvonne. And I know this is your arena and you know a lot of processes and different techniques to overcome grief and heal. Before we go into details, can you share what is grief or how can you understand the nature of grief?
I would say grief is that natural process experienced after the loss of a loved one or a thing, because we all say grief is about bereavement, but grief is also about loss of a job, loss of a relationship, a home. And so we put it on death, but it can be so much more than that. It's loss. And so grief is what is evoked by the feelings of the loss. It provokes unresolved communications with the other person. And if you were not in control of losing your home or the breakdown of a relationship, it's the things that are not said. And grief is triggered by these things. Sure. But it's a natural process which is experienced after the loss of a loved one. I am going to say to you today that I am using my notes because I can get off track and talk too much. So I will refer back to my notes to ensure that I have everything what you need.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. It is rightly so. You spoke about different experiences and loss, isn't it? It can be even migration, losing your family, moving away, losing a job, losing friendship, losing relationships, parting from relationships. It could be totally different things for different people. So what are the different life experiences that can lead to grief in your opinion?
Okay, so there's a number of life experiences that can lead to grief. Loss of health, loss of mobility. An experience that I've experienced in the last 3 years, I fell over in 2019, and that loss of mobility caused me a great deal of pain. And it was grief. I was experiencing something from being totally active all the time to being someone who needed to rely on other people. So a loss of mobility, a loss of health can cause grief, loss of relationship, a pet. And I'll talk a little bit about those because sometimes people devalue those and people hide if they say they've lost a pet. Sometimes people think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. But for the person who's lost the pet, of course, it's a big deal. And also one of the things, loss of safety. Something may happen to you and you may be burgled. And I'm just bringing real life experiences. You could be burgled, and from that moment onwards, you don't feel safety in your own home. And you may have to move. As in the case of one of my clients, she had to move. She couldn't stay there anymore. So therefore, there's that grieving process where she was forced to leave something that she loved. Also, loss of innocence. And as you work with, I don't know how many here are therapists, but as I work with clients who have had sexual abuse, that loss of innocence is a process that needs to be grieved, which a lot of people don't understand or acknowledge. And it's later on in life that it sometimes then comes back to them. And some people, to be honest, they don't recognize that they're going through a grieving process. They don't recognize it because, and we'll come on to this a bit later, because to fill that void, they insert something else into their life.
Thank you. As I was listening to you, I could really relate to it because I fractured my patella many years ago, and just loss of mobility and illness or confinement to the area or not being able to do what were able to do can also cause grief. And I think that's an important point to raise and for people to understand that it is a different kind of grief, I guess. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for that.
Just one more thing which affected all of us, the pandemic, loss of freedom. We lost so much freedom, things that we took for granted. And during that time, I don't think it's impacted on us, but I don't think we've really recognized how much we lost during that 3 years or 2 years, as some people say. That loss of freedom, the freedom to be able to travel, go where you want to go, get up and go out to work. Someone saying to you, you can only walk for an hour a day. That was a lot, enormous amount of restriction. And unless you've experienced something like that before in war or, a different country, I don't think people really appreciated how much it's impacted on us.
That so resonates with me because when the lockdown started and people were calling and they were really stressed out, and actually I started doing the videos. I think the first couple of videos I spoke about how it was so similar to being in the war zone because I am from Sri Lanka. I experienced the war during that curfews and loss around people, losing people and loved ones as well. And it was so similar to that experience. Basically, your freedom is being taken. Someone else is dictating what you can do and cannot do. And that is exactly the situation. I feel now people can resonate with those experiences a bit more after going through them. And yes, what you said is so true. It does affect you psychologically, emotionally, isn't it? It's less talked about and forgotten about now. Okay, we don't have a lockdown anymore, so now it's back to business. But it's not really. Unfortunately, back in South Asia, we are not very psychologically minded. Definitely when we were growing up and we don't have the support system either. A lot of people miss that window to get that support, really. And what people don't realize is those things can come up in different ways later in life, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I'm recognizing from a lot of my clients now is that the pandemic, they keep saying to me, they said it's finished, everything's finished, we're back to normal. However, I'm still feeling unsafe. I'm still feeling there's something wrong. Some have had COVID, they've recovered, but they feel like their body hasn't come back to what it should be. So there is so much processing still going on, and I don't think we've actually seen the magnitude of what's happened.
Thank you, Yvonne. Something else I wanted to talk about is I have heard a lot about complex grief and anticipated grief. And I perhaps, on a superficial level, I perhaps understand, but I'm sure as an expert, you will be able to explain to our audience what they really are.
Okay, so I'm going to use my notes for this. Complex grief, let's look at that first. And let's look at the pandemic. Unable to say goodbye. Unable to say goodbye brings up so much different emotions. My nephew died in 2020, and my sister not being able to go into the home and prepare him because she was told he was going. Today is his anniversary. He died 2 years ago today.
So sorry to hear that, Yvonne. Really sorry.
So it's interesting that this talk is today because I didn't even put the two dates together. I didn't put the date together. When you said the 8th of May, I was like, 8th of May, what happened on that day? And it was only as the time started to come into me, I could feel bodily my sensation. I was changing. I was reactive. And I thought, something's going on. And then I could see my sister. And I could start to see the change manifesting in her again, because we've now come back round to the anniversary. And this complex grief is unable to let go sometimes. When people die, we're unable to let go because we feel we may have failed them. We may feel guilt. And the grieving process is, although natural, but the grieving process becomes entwined with all different things, all different emotions. And so it becomes, rather than, I say straightforward process with quotes because it's never straightforward, it's unique for everyone. But it can start to impact on your well-being. And that's what I say about complex grief. And then blame comes into it. And rather than being able to let go of that blame, it's a continuum. You can't put that person out of your mind. And so it then impacts on your mental well-being, people around you, because you can't engage as you once did. And so it's difficult, as in all the different parts of it anyway. Anticipated grief, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm anticipating grief is we start to deal with grief before the loss occurs. My nephew was born 1986. He was given 6 days to live. And throughout his life, the doctors, the consultants kept giving my sister 6 days, 6 months, 6 weeks. There was this constant anticipation of death is going to come and not knowing. But if you speak to my sister, she'll tell you her grieving process started in 1986. When my nephew died in 2020, what people expected to see, her broken, unable to cope, unable to manage, was not what they saw, because this was something that was continuum going on for a long period of time. So that's one example. Another example is when someone's going through terminal illness or dementia. And I'm experiencing that with my dad at the moment, who's in the stages of dementia. And you know that the change is coming. I'm losing the man he once was. I'm losing that person that I could sit down and engage with. Our emotions at that point are betwixt and between. And I'll just read this. We are grieving the loss of what was the life we had with the person and the current situation. Again, it's the loss of the familiar. And that's what the process of loss is the loss of familiar. Something that what was and is no longer going to be.
Thank you so much, and let him rest in peace, and all our love and prayers to you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for, even with all that pain, for you to come back and speak today. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Yvonne. Thank you. There are different theories about grief. I have ever known only of Kubler-Ross. Because grief is a normal process, isn't it? It only becomes pathological or clinical only when it lasts for a long time or it's abnormal or prolonged time. There are different stages of grief according to Kubler-Ross, I'm sure. Of course, you know that. Denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And it doesn't have to be in that order. It can be in any order. But more importantly for me, I'm sure there are other things that people should know of, because including me, I only know of Kubler-Ross because that's all I have heard. Do you know anything else? Or how would you explain the scientific explanation behind it, really?
The first thing I'll say about Kubler-Ross is that her model has been applied to almost every situation now: divorce, death, terminal illness, the stages that people go through. But it's not set in concrete, because some people go through 2 stages. And how I work, I don't really use stages, because everyone grieves uniquely. What the expectation that how someone would be if someone passes is really set on the relationship they had with that person. I refer to John Bowlby's theory on attachment, because that's what I work with. And the attachment, and I'll read this to you. He provides an explanation for the common human tendency to develop strong affectional bonds. So we're attached to everyone. We're attached to each other. And that interaction is a relationship that occurs. As a result of the long-term interaction, starting as a child growing up, he suggests that grief is an instinctive universal response to separation. So you separate from that attachment, then you grieve so it's a grieving process. So that's what I go with. Also, Colin Murray Park suggests that grieving is a process, a sequence of reactions to the death of a significant loved one. And he's talking about a person per se. But as I said before, loss that we all experience comes in different ways: relationships, work, careers, retirement. I know one of my clients, her dad worked up until he was 89. 89. And in the end, they had to say to him, you need to go. Within 2 years, that man had passed, because he didn't feel he had a purpose anymore. So it's sometimes your attachment to something is because of what you feel your purpose is. Once that's taken away, you feel like, well, what have I got? What else have I got? So it's very complex, but I go along with Bowlby because at the moment I am studying attachment theory, and for me that coincides with grief recovery, because it's about, when I talk about grief and recovery, people think, how can you have that in the same sentence? But learning how grief manifests itself sometimes, and learning how I went through a grieving process and didn't even recognize I was grieving. I was just eating more because I felt I wanted to feel something. I felt empty. I recognized that it is that separation. It is that tearing apart from something that was familiar. And it's about acknowledging that process, not pushing it down, because that's what a lot of us do, push our feelings and emotions down. And the more we push it down, it becomes compounded, because the more you push it down, then something else happens, and then something else happens. And then before you know, it's just exploded, because we've not dealt with the source.
Two things stood out for me personally as well, because my dad worked till 85 this last year. And soon after he retired, he's a doctor, soon after he decided, we all said, there has to be a time that he stopped working. And soon after that, he felt very ill. Many people know that I went to see my dad a few months back, and I had to host the show from Sri Lanka. That kind of really stood out for me. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon when we were about to speak about this is, I resonate with Kubra-Ross in a way, is even when my grandma passed away, I can now, looking back, I wasn't so psychologically aware at that time, but I could see, I have spoken to people who are even angry with the person who left them, or they say, okay, fine, this once, how many times we have said, right? This time once, like we should put it all, like, we are trying to kind of bargain. And I write a lot. Writing is my way of expressing most of the time. But when my grandmom passed away, who I was really, really close to, I wrote the trilogy after 2 years, and all my family was thinking, what is wrong with her? But I also don't pretend, and I'm not for it. I only write things when it comes straight from my heart, when I'm ready for it and I feel like it. And it really took me 2 years for me to be able to write that eulogy for her. So I think there is something in it. And of course, the attachment side, I know the attachment side, but that's about it. I know very, very superficially about it. It is really important for people to know different theories and how different things can affect. So thank you so much, Yvonne, for bringing that new perspective and explaining to us there are different kind of stages. And in your words, what are the stages of grief then?
As I said, everyone's unique. And to be honest, I try and stay away from stages in my work. I don't use stages because, and I'll give you an example. A client came to me last year, November. Her mom had passed away, and she was angry. Not because her mom had passed away, but angry because she hadn't been informed by her dad that her mom was so ill. Where would I put that? Where would I even begin to work that into a stage? Because she's not angry at the person who passed. And many people who are bereaved are not angry at the person who's passed. They may be angry at the circumstances that surrounds the person who's passed, but they're not angry at the person per se.
But isn't that very common though, Yvonne? Like people blame the doctors, people blame the system, people blame...
They do, because...
We always find somebody to blame, right?
They do. They're looking at the blame. And if you look at Kubler-Ross's, her model, they say there's a denial. But it's not a denial. It's probably numbness and probably shock that this has happened. Because if you're not expecting it, there's a numbness there. So it's not a denial. The person's gone, but the denial would be that shock if it was sudden. I had a call yesterday, one of my good friends, her dad passed away, it was sudden. Her son's in shock still to this point, 3 days now. He still cannot understand that his granddad is gone. It's not denial, he knows his granddad's gone, but he's in shock. And that numbness manifests itself in his body. So when I talk about my client last year, and I think to myself, where would I put her? She wasn't denying that her mom had gone. And that's why I've moved away from stages, because she wasn't in denial of it. She was angry about the circumstances surrounding it. And she was noticeably frustrated that she hadn't had all the information that she needed. And she didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye. And this is what I work with. It's the unspoken communications. It's those unspoken things. And we'll touch on it a bit further when we talk about completing. It's those unspoken things, the things that, you know, if she had gone to the hospital the day before, I would have had a chance to say goodbye, Mum. I would have had a chance to kiss her goodbye. So it's the unspoken things, you know, the things that you would have loved to have said, but you didn't get an opportunity to. And that's what causes pain and frustration and sometimes anger. Yeah, of course. Of course.
Many times, healthcare professionals bear the brunt of when something go wrong. It's always something to blame. And the other reason I spoke about this particular thing is I spoke to a doctor who told me her dad passed away, and the next day, night they passed away. Early morning, they just went to watch some event. They were part of the event because they were perhaps in denial, or that's the only way they could go. And it is very unique to different people. But I think it's important also to understand, isn't it? Different stages, or might be, you don't name it stages, but different things can happen.
Different things that, and I appreciate that, because the model, the Kubler-Ross model, has been around for so long. I appreciate that there's people that use that. And I will say, you know, the denial for me is about avoidance. It brings avoidance and confusion because it's fear of the unknown. What happens now? You know, a woman loses her husband and he may be the person that takes care of everything. What happens now? What's going to happen to me? How do I carry on? I was talking to someone the other day, a neighbor of mine whose husband passed last year, October, very quickly, you know, went into hospital Monday, by Thursday he was dead. And she expressed to me, Yvonne, I don't even know where to begin. I'm still confused as to where to begin. So it's that confusion. It's that confusion. And then moving on from that, it may be the anger, and which brings the anxiety and irritation. Why me? Well, you know, these things happen. I hear people saying, why did it happen to me? I know for myself, I was in that situation. 30 years ago, I had a ectopic pregnancy, and I almost died. And at the time, both my sisters and my best friend were expecting. And I was angry for a very long time because I kept questioning, well, why me? And so if we look at the model of Kubler-Ross, and I bargained, I said, God, you know, I just want one child, at least one. Being told by the doctors, you're not going to have any more because this was really serious, you go into a state of shock. So it's reverse, isn't it? Instead of there's a reversal of what was going on. So when I say stages, I think you just flip around. There's so many emotions that you feel that you can just go from one point to the next. But I don't want to pigeonhole anyone into a stage.
I understand, it's very fluid, and those stages can I totally agree about that, because I don't think they're human beings, isn't it? So we don't follow. Would you be able to give some personal examples or client experiences? I know you touched upon a couple of them already. Nothing like stories for people to relate to and understand how they can support somebody else to cope with these things.
So at the moment, I have a client who I walk with weekly. We walk and talk. Her partner died last year. They'd been together for 56 years. She feels as if she lost a limb because their relationship was so succinct, as she says. Her processing of the death is that he's gone on to do an assignment in heaven, because she has faith. So her processing is that he's gone on to an assignment in heaven. And we've worked together for the last 6 months. And during the last 3 months, I would say that she could perhaps be able to do what she's doing on her own now, but we still walk together once a week, just so that she can express how she's feeling. And what I've shown her is to be mindful. I'm teaching her mindfulness, to be in this moment, to acknowledge what she's missing or what she's going to miss with her partner. And for some who've had children who have lost, I get them to acknowledge the milestones. Acknowledge the feelings, but not sit in there with them. And allow them to become a swirling pool of ruminating thoughts. My client has planted a rose tree in her garden because that helps her to remember he used to buy her roses all the time. And that gives her something to, when she sees it blooming, that gives her something to hold on to. And when we talk about, in our initial stages, when we talked about losses, she had accumulated so many throughout her life that she didn't even acknowledge that she had experienced a loss. Moving from Glasgow down to London, leaving her parents, then having to be sent to Brighton when the war was going on, and being on ration. She didn't even know that. She knew she lost the connection with her parents, but for her, it was almost like this is something that everyone had to do. So it was just part of the process. And actually getting her to connect with those feelings of how she felt during those times has helped her now with acknowledging what's going on with her losing her partner. And sometimes as a therapist, you feel to yourself, great, my client's coming along nicely. Last week, Tuesday, it was almost like she'd taken 10 steps back. We went out to walk as normal, and she couldn't walk. She was struggling, and I said several times, would you like to sit down? What's happening? What are you feeling at this moment? And she said, oh, it would have been his birthday on Saturday. Brought it all back. And so we talked about the triggers, the songs that you play together that might just, you hear it, you're out shopping and you hear the song and you burst into tears. Okay, you allow it to flow because it's a release. When you release, you start to feel better. So that's one of my clients. I won't go into any more detail with her, but that's one of my clients that I'm working with at the moment.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. It is really powerful because it's most of the times we beat ourselves, isn't it, when we go back to it, and how can we were supposed to have done better. We got over it. And it's really good that you are showing to people it's okay to feel those things even after a long time with some triggers, because it is natural, it can happen. That's the whole point of talking about this, so that people understand that. Thank you.
And one more thing, people develop patterns of behavior. So yesterday, I was speaking to someone, and one of her things that she did when her partner died, she just kept buying things. She became a shopaholic. And the anniversary was a couple of weeks ago, and for her, she went out and just splashed out money, just bought something that she's then saying to me yesterday, do you think I needed that? I said, well, I don't know. Do you think you need it? She says, well, I'm sitting down thinking about what we worked on, and I'm thinking to myself, did I buy it just because that's my pattern? I feel a void and I feel I need to fill it with something. So I purchased something. And I said, well, if you sit down and think what the work that we've done, you're connecting. You're now beginning to connect that you purchase something that you perhaps don't need because you're beginning to feel that void because there's an anniversary coming on. It's knowing. And it's giving that information to people to know, okay, I'm feeling like this because, not squash the feeling down, acknowledge it, honor the person. But don't go back down the behavior route of doing something that might be detrimental to you. Spending in excess. That's just one of the things.
Thank you so much. It's different coping mechanisms, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
We sometimes find it difficult to know how to support a person, what to say, what not to say. So why is it important to know how to support the person who is experiencing grief? Because we say helpful things, we say unhelpful things. We sometimes are confused what to say. As an expert, can you tell us how can we support someone?
With grief, you come from the heart. A lot of us come from the head, so it's practical. And sometimes people say things, and I'm going to read some of these because some of these I find quite, but I know that I've said them myself because I didn't know what to say. So, when I had my ectopic pregnancy, so many people said to me, "You're young, you'll have more." Oh my God, how awful. Oh, well, maybe something was going to be wrong with the baby. That's why you lost the baby. So there were so many different things that came up, which at the time, they're probably saying it for whatever reason. They're not saying it to be malicious, but it doesn't sit well. Don't feel bad. You can have more. Time is a healer. With my sister, when her son died, he's gone to a better place. He's not suffering anymore. And, a lot of men growing up, they hear, be strong, don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Pull yourself together. It's almost like you're saying to someone, you can't feel. Don't feel those feelings. Pull yourself together. And unfortunately, they take this through their lives. And before I go on to the positives, a few weeks ago, something happened and my dad was very ill. I had to rush off from studies to go. And I went to my tutor. I said to my tutor, look, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave the lecture. Something's happened, blah, blah, blah. And I just started to cry because I was emotional. And she said, come on, you're a strong woman. And I stopped in my tracks because I thought, this is what we do. We look at people and we say to ourselves, he looks strong, she looks strong. And then we give them that label. So we want to not allow them to be. And what I try to do with my clients is allow them to be, whether they come across as strong or not. Sometimes even the strong needs to cry. We need to be vulnerable. And that's what I've learned for myself. We need to be vulnerable. To be able to appreciate and understand someone else's pain, we need to be vulnerable ourselves.
Absolutely.
So the helpful things I'd say is, I'm here when you're ready to talk. I'm here. Make yourself available. I'm so sorry for your loss. I wish I had the right words now, but just know that I care. Just sending a message, you're in my thoughts and prayers with a love emoji. Sometimes that's enough for some people. Just giving a hug. And if you live nearby, just cooking a meal and taking it round. Ring the bell. I've bought you some food to eat. Because that's what happens when people are grieving. Sometimes they stop eating the right things, or they start eating unhealthily, or they don't eat. So just doing those practical things, calling someone and saying, would you like me to get you some shopping? I know this has happened. I'm in the shops. I'm going to the shop. I can get you something. So it's the practical things that we can do. And I know some cultures do that already anyway. But it's just reinforcing that and just being, the worst thing is to say, I know how you feel. You don't. You don't know how I feel because my feelings are unique to me. You may have experienced the same thing, but we're not going to feel the same way. So that's what I say about helping people. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think we all are guilty of it. We feel forced that we have to say something.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Sometimes we don't have to say anything.
You don't have to say anything.
Just be there to let the other person be and feel how they want to feel. But somehow we feel obliged that we have to say something. And I think most of the time that's when we say something which is not supposed to be said.
And we feel obliged as well to, someone starts to cry, we start patting them on the back. You'll stop them from crying because they feel they need to stop then. So okay, I'm fine now. Because we've actually interrupted that flow. So when someone starts crying, when someone comes for therapy, I give them a box of tissues, because when they're crying, I just allow them to cry. Because they need to release that, because then the healing can start to begin. If they keep holding it, it becomes like a ball inside their chest or their throat. And working one of my clients, she would always be constantly pulling at her throat. And one day I said to her, why do you keep doing this? And she said, because it's just there. And so I had to take her through a process of just feeling that and describing, what does that feel like being there? How can you move that from there? What does it mean? And, it's interesting working with different people where they internalize their grief. So it manifests itself in different parts of their body. And that's something that I look out for. And I know for myself, although I fell over, but I realized at the time, 3 years ago, there was a lot of losses going on around me. And your body takes the trauma, it's impacted. And I recognized that I started to hold my grief and my trauma in my hips. So it was making it difficult for me to walk. And it's only through time that I've managed to release some of those things. And I'm slowly getting better.
Thank you so much. Listening to you, it definitely explains how vast the experiences can be and how each of us go through grief very differently. Different people deal with losses very differently, as we have established. Then how do we deal with those losses? You speak about short-term energy relieving behaviors. That's something I heard only from you for the first time.
Okay.
Because that is not a language. I have heard in different ways, but that particular language was the first time I heard it from you. So can you explain?
Okay, so STERBs, or short-term energy relieving behaviors, are behaviors that we use, as you would say, defense mechanisms.
Yes, correct.
Coping mechanisms.
That's right.
But these are behaviors that we use when we want to fill the void. So we find ourselves, and I'm going to talk from my experience because perhaps that's a bit easier. So from my experience, when I lost my child and everyone else around me was still pregnant, I used avoidance. And I moved away from where my family were and moved to a completely different area. So I would be on my own because I wanted to reinvent who I was as a person. How that correlated, I don't know. I'm still working on that one. What I know, though, is that I used drugs and alcohol and food in excess to fill that void because I was sad, very sad. But I was also someone who, if you said to me, how are you, Yvonne? How are you feeling? I'm fine. I'm fine. Because I knew to put the mask on. I knew to go out there and just be this person. Okay, yeah, this has happened, and I will get over it. And as long as I have one child, that's fine. When you hear you may not have any, that puts a different slant on it. And so for a long time, I used what I would say short-term energy relieving behaviors to compensate for the loss. And recognizing that, going and having therapy and understanding what I was doing allowed me to reevaluate my life and where I was. Some people use work. They become very busy with trying to fill the gap or fill the void that they miss someone. So they put work and become workaholics. They start to use work as the means to compensate for what is missing or the person who's missing. So they stay at work later because that's easier to do than going home to face a empty house. Some people use retail therapy, as one of my clients. And what I'm saying, when I'm saying these things, there is a balance. So I'm not saying that you can't do these things and use it as a coping mechanism. What I'm saying is when it becomes to excess, that's when there is a problem. Because my client used retail therapy and got into bankruptcy. So what I'm saying is when it goes to the extreme, some people start gambling. It's the excess of what you're doing. Some people use exercise as a means to release themselves. And I talk about exercise in various ways because I know some people go to the extreme with the exercise because they just want to feel good. And those endorphins are activated.
Run as high, they say.
Yes, you feel really good. Because you can put all those feelings of lowness, depression, anger aside in that space that you're doing it. But when you start to do it excessively until it becomes detrimental to your body, then that's what we talk about, the behaviors that can become excessive. That's what we don't want. And sometimes it's done unconsciously without realizing why. So it's about identifying, why are we doing these things? Why are we eating in excess? Why are we drinking? Why are we using drugs in excess? Why are we shopping in excess? Why are we having... And this touches on one of my clients who just became very promiscuous during that time. Very promiscuous. And would come into sessions and say, I can't understand. I went out last night and I did X, Y, Z. Why? What was happening for you? I just wanted to feel the connection. Important to acknowledge this.
Thank you so much. You have touched upon what can become coping mechanisms. So this is really good. I was listening to you and I was thinking two things. When you are a resilient person, resilience can become the problem itself because, like you say, people say, oh, you're a strong girl, you can cope. On the other side, we learn to put the mask ourselves, and the more distressed we feel, the more harder we party, or the broader the smile, everything in balance, right? So it's really good that you touched upon it. Thank you. Why do we need to have a completion in a relationship?
I'm going to make it easy and just read this bit for you because I think it will just be succinct. Completion is not about forgetting the person. It's about completing the relationship. It gives us the ability to say goodbye to the pain. If grief is unresolved, it cannot be completed. Completeness is being able to say the things that we felt we never heard or that need to be said again or were never made. It's those emotional communications. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It gives us the ability to say goodbye to any pain which may be limiting us from the memories we had, and also say goodbye to any unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations about the future. Completeness brings us the full circle. We are born, we live, we die. We need to complete to be able to move on. So if we complete a circle with one person, we can then move on. So that's how I bring it into, that's what we do. I use completion, and how we do completion is through we do a lifeline of the person, the relationship, from when you met the person to when the relationship ended. And all the great things or bad things that happen inside, because everything's not going to be great. but all the things inside. So when we talk about, please forgive me for not understanding your desires to have this dream. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you when you were telling me about your dreams for the future. So it's about just releasing all the things you wanted to say, but you didn't say. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional.
Totally understandable. Thank you so much.
Dear.
And
okay.
It is energetically, emotionally, it's a very demanding subject, particularly given your circumstances. So I totally understand. Thank you, Yvonne. I totally trying to understand. I finished my sentence and it dawned on me. I totally said something which I always say not to say. So yes, I'm trying to understand, but where you're coming from. So thank you so much for that. Can you give us 10 steps to healing? Today we are here to show and help people how they can overcome it, because we either experience it, we have seen other people experience it, we are experiencing it, or we will definitely be experiencing it. So because the problem with human beings is it is a mortal life, but we somehow think we are immortal, and everybody around us is immortal. And that's the issue, right?
To start this off is to say for what's happened in the last 3 years, it would be good to just be mindful of where we are at this moment and just know that this is where we are. Be mindful. This morning I got up and the sun was shining. I said, this is a brilliant day for grief, talking about grief, because the sun is shining. If the sun wasn't shining and you're talking about grief, it can be quite dismal. However, it's something that needs to be discussed. And talking to people about grief sometimes brings up raw emotion. So I apologize, because I should have said at the beginning about how some people, it may trigger them. And I apologize for not saying that. But just to let you know that however you're feeling, it's natural. It's natural. So I put together a list of 10 things, 10 steps to healing. And that's what I feel. And this is not the gospel, but this is what I use. Celebrate the memories you made together, the life you had, because your relationship was unique. And the process to healing will be the same. It'll be unique to you. Acknowledge that some days you will feel sad, but don't push those feelings away. Suppressing them is not good for your mental health. And if you experience guilt, sadness, anger, and remorse, it's not uncommon, especially in the case of anticipated grief. Self-care, absolutely important. Sleep. Sleep is the number one. Take time to look after yourself, but sleep. I used to manage on 5 hours a night. Now I have to do 8. And I set my alarm. Wake me in 8 hours, Siri. And even if it wakes me up, even if I wake up before the 8 hours, I lay in my bed. Because it's important to sleep. When you're sleeping, you're healing. Keep your diet simple but healthy. Grief is physically and mentally exhausting. And I'm going to just touch a little bit on that, because when you're feeling it, sometimes you're going to feel it across here, across your shoulders. One of the techniques I use, I haven't got one to hand, I get a towel sometimes and I just squeeze it and just keep turning that towel until it's taking all the tension, because you're moving this then, it's taking all the tension out of your shoulder. And when you sit for a moment with that twisted towel and then just take time and release it, you start to feel the pressure releasing. So that's just one of the things. Exercise. So I say exercise to excessive? No. But incorporate simple walking into your daily life. It doesn't cure grief, but it can alleviate the feelings. Just don't overdo it. Grief can make you feel out of control sometimes, which can make you unnerved. And you may just be walking through the shops and the tears start to come. Just let them come. It's a natural thing. Natural. So allow them to just be released. I went out for a walk 2 days ago, and just walking and seeing the trees blossoming and everything, and the tears just started coming down my face. I don't know what I was crying for, but it wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was just gratitude. And I think if we stay in a space of gratitude as well, that will help us moving forward. Have compassion and be patient with yourself. We really say some negative things to ourselves. And sometimes we say, oh, I should be over this by now. Or why am I still feeling like this? Have some compassion. You wouldn't say to your friend, you should be over this by now. So apply that to yourself and have patience with it. This is the thing. We lose patience with ourselves. And we don't realize, I've had to develop some patience trying to support my dad with dementia. That's when you realize you have to develop patience. So try and develop it for yourself now, while you're in this moment. One of the other things is connecting with other people who are perhaps going through the same thing, because that can be mutually beneficial for you. It can go 2 ways, but I would like to say it can be mutually beneficial. And I think the last one for me is accepting the new reality. That's probably harder, but it's something that will happen, is accepting that, okay, I have to forge a new life on my own. That's talking about relationships, partnerships. I have to forge a new life on my own. But when you start to sit down, and I would actually use writing. I journal a lot. What do I want to do next? Where am I going? How do I want to feel? You know, I use affirmations a lot. And so I have on my door, it's a good day to have a good day. And that's the first thing I see in the morning. It's a good day to have a good day. And my next one that I think is great, everything I'm going through is planting something valuable for me. So it's having those things in your eyesight so you can see them. So they motivate you and they keep you in that space where you can say, okay, you know what? Today doesn't feel great. But if I plant my feet on the ground and I step out of bed, I can say, I am grateful that I'm alive to see another day. And that's my 10 things.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you so much. We all have learned a lot of things for coping mechanisms, shorter, but serves whatever we call it. It's great tips. Thank you so much. And you definitely allowed us to understand how the process is and how different people cope with different things and what we can do to help others and what to say and what not to say, more importantly. So thank you so much for that. This particular episode was requested by people in our community. So thank you so much for reaching out and asking, because that's the whole point of having a community. So that's the supportive system we have so that we can ask each other for help. And that's the whole point of this talk show, really. So thank you so much for the request. And you have done real justice by talking so eloquently about this as well. So thank you so much, Yvonne.
Thank you.
One last thing, I just wanted to ask, what has been your experience with the talk show, Yvonne?
I was nervous. I am grateful to have been asked to talk about grief. It's one of the things that I have started working with, and it seems to just present itself to me. And this experience has been good. It's been a learning curve for me, because I always want to learn everything off here. And I realize I can actually utilize my notes and not feel that I have to be expert with everything. I can't keep it all up there anymore anyway. The age is catching up with me. So this has been a good experience. Thank you. It's been a learning curve for me as well to be open to communities. And you touched on communities. I think it's so important, even with grief, you know, within communities, there will be someone who understands what you're feeling. They may not know exactly, but they can actually have empathy where you are. They can meet you where you are. And that's important. And it's reaching out. It's not just holding it to one side or pushing down those feelings of, you know, loss. And sometimes we're embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. You know, sometimes we're embarrassed. You know, I get thoughts of, you know, it would be probably for my dad, he's fed up now. He wants to just go. And sometimes I think I wouldn't have that burden and I feel guilty. And then I have to really bring myself back and say, these feelings are normal. These are normal feelings. This is what a lot of people experience and are afraid to say. But we just need to be open, mindful, you know, that these are things that we may experience in life if we have elderly parents.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you. Thank you. And particularly on a very difficult day, you still managed to come and talk to us. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
As I mentioned before, lots of love and care to you and your family.
Thank you.
Next week, we are going to be talking about nurturing one's memory. Dementia is sadly becoming more familiar to most of us. We are hearing about it more. We are knowing people who are experiencing. You just mentioned about your dad as well. The next episode is episode 88. We are going to be talking about nurturing one's memory with Dr. Amita Paspati, who is the oldest psychiatrist in NHS UK. Now, over to Rebecca Hood to give vote of thanks.
On behalf of Meet Menaca, celebrating you, real life, real stories. Today we heard some real stories from Yvonne. And as I always say, nothing like speaking your heart, and you candidly spoke and you touched our hearts today. And I want to thank you for coming and gracing our platform. And as tradition, as what Menaca always says, I like to speak about the name, the hidden meaning of your name. And Yvonne, Y is for the yearning you feel for others. V is for virile, your inner enthusiasm for others to recover and to heal. O being old-fashioned, you cherish others. N is for your name, a pleasant one indeed that suits you. N is for being natural, the genuine side of you coming out so strongly. E is for endear, for all those you touch. Yvonne is much more than just a name, because I think the day you were formed in your mother's womb and you were born with this name written all over you. We just want to thank you, Yvonne, for sharing your time with us, not forgetting all those who participating on this platform. We thank you for your support and your love, and to make this community a thriving community, supporting one another. We know many who are here who really were yearning for this topic. And for those who are on the Facebook, we also thank you for your undying support. And with that, thank you one and all. And once again, thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirebe.
I'm humbled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirebe. Thank you, Yvonne, because after knowing the day, I am really humbled you came still and spoke today on our show. So thank you so much. For people who are on the Zoom, please hold on. You will have the opportunity to ask the question directly to the speaker Yvonne today. For people who are listening to us on Facebook, thank you so much for all the support and love you give us week after week. And without you all, people who support us in our community on Zoom, on Facebook, tell us which subjects they want to discuss and ask questions, the show wouldn't be the same. So thank you so much for all the support. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel so that it can reach so many more people and benefit everyone as much as possible. Next week, same time, same place, for people who are on Facebook, we will be talking about nurturing one's memory with Dr. Amida Pasupati. It will be our episode 88. For people who are listening on Facebook, it has come to that time of day to say goodbye. Until we meet again, stay safe, be happy, and keep smiling.